it's like kind of an honor to be on this panel. I got asked to fill in or kind of later, and I was like a bit nervous about it because I don't normally do this, but I was like, all right, it's time to step up and talk about the stuff that I've been wanting to talk about. So, so I'm going to talk about APOC in a minute, anarchist people of color, but I'm going to open a bit with why I think prefiguration is important. So I'm going to actually open with a quote from Paul D'Amato from the Socialist Worker, just because I think this really lays out where there's a critical disagreement. He says, anarchism makes the error of believing that the means to achieving a classless, stateless society must prefigure the end results. Thus, if we want to achieve a society based on free association without coercion and without bureaucratic centralism, we must build forms of organization today that prefigure that future society. So I think, and I'm like, if you remove the error, that's like the best definition I've ever heard of what I think needs to happen and how we're actually going to do this. Because I'm like, well, wait, you want to build a bureaucratic statist system built on coercion to get to one that isn't? So for a living, I'm a grad student in clinical social work. I work in a psychiatric clinic, and prefiguration is how we do psychological work. That's the base of it. It's like if you want someone to do something, you model the behavior, you show people how this is supposed to work. If someone has never had proper parenting and you're working with kids, you model proper boundaries, proper ways to behave, and then people react to those. You don't do things. I mean, it never worked when your parents said, do as I say, not as I do, because you follow the models that are set forth. And so why would it work any different in politics? The other thing I want to say that's really amazing about anarchism is that it allows the constant recreation of our politics. Like, what was around in 1920 isn't necessarily what we're talking about today, and that's okay, because it wasn't written in a few books by a few guys that we name our theories after, and then we have to kind of make a way to fit what we're doing now into that. We're like, well, I mean, I'm just going to say it, it's like, well, Marx didn't, how did this work into Marx? Like, what did Marx say about this? Well, why? We're all pretty intelligent people in this room. We can figure this out. We don't have to look back to somebody and try and jam it into their model to come up with something. It's been a long time. We're all very capable people, and we want to build this society. He's not here. So we're going to have to solve the problems that come after it, too. So to me, that's like a critical thing that I think anarchism does, is it allows us to talk, and if we want to add something to our analysis, we can, and it's perfectly okay to. And so I'm going to talk about anarchist people of color, which is a tendency, a network, depending on where you are. It's a collective, it's a massive web presence, and it's an identity, and more than anything, I feel like. And it provides so there's a dual role that APOC plays. That's what we call it, APOC. So on the one hand, we're pushing anarchism to having a real analysis, a much stronger analysis of race, gender, heteronormativity, etc. On the other, we're actually creating our own space. So we didn't, and there's different people with different views about this, but some of us from the Bay who've been doing this for about 6 years are pretty much of the mind that was like, look, I'll quote Pedro Capilla from, because he's one of my favorite people in the world, and his quote was like, you want to know why the masses don't flock to your politics? Because they're petty white politics. They're for you and your comrades, not for us and ours, so we're going to write what ours are. And so that's what this became about, was, really writing down what would we like anarchism to look like? Like, what do we want our classless future society to look like? Like, what would it look like if we were to do this for reals? And from that, one second, sorry. And so I thought that was and that caused a huge uproar at the book fair a few years ago when he dropped the pamphlet the day before the book fair, and it came out and it was all over and people were screaming about it. But I thought it was right on. I was like, okay, that's part of the problem, is that we're not a dogmatic group of, like a dogmatic political institution. We're allowed to think and create. So there lies that tension within APOC about are we here to help white people get better on race and write stuff so they can read it and be like, oh wait, or are we here to write things for our own people? And so both of those happen, and I wouldn't say that they're in conflict, in a steady conflict in terms of what we feel like the work should be for the future, for the group, and for the people. I want to say I apologize for not being more organized. I was on the flight here, and Marley and Me came on, and it's a movie about a dog, and I had to reference it because I was like, I need to apologize. I was writing, and then it was really good, and I gotta say, it was really sad, and the whole plane was crying. I was like, who shows a play? So there was a lot of humanity on it, in it, so which plays in what we're talking about here. So as APOC, the idea is that we honor the history of other people of color groups that have come before us. Like, there's a huge study of like the Black Panthers, Maoism, the Young Lords, like Puerto Rican Liberation Army, and those are all groups we draw from because these are groups that have come before us, and we have a lot to learn from in terms of organizing as people of color, organizing on an international solidarity line, in an anti-imperialist framework. Those are all really important themes for us to draw on. But we critically engage with them on the role of the state and on, like, we're also critical, like, what were the issues in the Panther Party around heteronormativity? How would we as APOC want to deal with that question so that we can fix that mistake, so we can, because we're ultimately trying to build this world we want to see. And so a brief history, it's been about 10, 12 years since the first APOC-esque kind of ideas started forming. Maybe more like 7 or 10 since like there's actually been organizing meetings and whatnot. And it's in the Bay, we began in 2003 or so, and I came in 2004 when we first had meetings. We don't have meetings at the moment, and then I'll get into failures in a moment, because we were talking about failure, and I had a lot to say about that one. So nationally, APOC runs campaigns on things like, in the Bay, when I was involved, right around 2004, there was a young, disabled African-American man who the police told to get out of his car. And he's like, I can't actually get out of the car. And they were like, okay, then go ahead and get yourself out of the car. And we reached down, they shot him a bunch of times. And so APOC, along with, and this was an interesting campaign, it was APOC, Gay Shame, and the Nation of Islam. And it was like, it was the most amazing. I had just moved to the Bay Area, so I was like, this is an amazing political group. I was like, we were really starting it up here. Like, this is great. But we ran a campaign where we were, we talked about like we're critical of what the police did. We're going to respect the families, but we're also going to put out there that like we could live without police. Like we could do this, and we put out an analysis of capitalism and class and race and said like, it isn't an accident that this happens. There are reasons for this, and this is what the world could look like if we wanted to build it this way. And there was a lot of people that were involved in that and there was people who came for other reasons through other groups who got involved and have been thinking pretty critically since then about what we put out there. So I'm going to go to the failures, but I think that was every city that's had an APOC group has, I think, had collapsed at least once or twice for various reasons, whether it's personal stuff. It's really hard to work in a group of people where you're aligning based on like race and racial solidarity, but there's questions of class in the room, there's questions of privilege, there's people like in our group there were people whose dads were doctors and people whose dads who didn't know their parents and adopted kids, and if we aren't dealing with those issues in the first round, we basically vaguely dealt with them and didn't really, and they ended up being what got us. So we weren't being very prefigurative and thoughtful about the interactions between us. We were looking outward as like, well, what can we put forth for other people as a vision? And then when it ultimately fell down in our laps and collapsed, it was like, well, I think it had to do more with the fact that we didn't actually look like what anybody would actually want to be a part of. Like, if you were to walk into our meeting, it was not a place that you would actually want to be for very long. So I feel like after that, there's been a long pause where we've been doing a lot of writing. This statement, Build It From Below, which Elliot from APOC and I wrote, which was like, we're going to build this, we want it to look like this, we want it to be from below, take into account all the social relations, we need to be honest and upfront about where we're coming from, we need to have a real dialogue about what an anti-authoritarian person of color organization would actually look like.